Thank you, Professor Elias. I should first of all thank the organizers. I'm not mentioning the names. And it's again a great pleasure to come back where I began my teaching career some 40 years back. So it's good to be back. Because the time is very limited, I will just go to points that I want to present before you. I just started it in a very general sense, in a connected world. Dr. Korea has been talking about the connections that he could find out historically. This is those connections with respect to the intersection between Islam and our concerns of gender as a category. Professor C.D. knows well, we've talked about it many times. You know, a friend of mine, K.M. Venu, and myself were working on a book on feminist theory in Malayalam in the 1980s. And one of our inquiry was, even though that's not part of the book, but for our own, due to our interest, speaking when this word feminism was used in Malayalam. And that search went up to Waka Maulavi. His publication, the Deepika, which was published especially for the Muslim community, was mentioning is this term feminism. Actually, in Malayalam it's translated as Stree Swatantrayavada. And in bracket, even in English, feminism is given. This was in the early 1930s, you should remember. And this was in the context of translation of an English book into Malayalam in that magazine. That book is about the Arab world. And what I understood looking at Waka Maulavi's own life as an important personality who has contributed a lot to Kerala's own thinking about that intersection between Islam and concerns of gender in general, but Islam and women in particular. Because Waka Maulavi was influenced by Muhammad Abdu of Egypt. That whole tradition of ijtihad, which that interpretative idea within Islam, one of the main sources of Islamic law, as you know. And Maulavi was very familiar with Abdu's tradition. Abdu, the Grand Mufti of Egypt, was asking for Muslim women's modern education. That was the Mufti's insistence, because schools and colleges were slowly opening to admit women at that point of time. And Maulavi, I'm sure, because of his cosmopolitan connection to the Arabic language and his religious concerns with the region, should have known the beginnings of the feminist movement in Egypt. The Egyptian Feminist Union was established in 1923 by Huda Shalabi. And when this word feminism I saw in Deepika, all these connections come to the fore. And all these things about feminism as Western and all those discussions that you see. But you see the concerns with feminism not in secular intellectuals of Kerala, but from a Maulavi, that you get those ideas. And their own, that kind of Islamic universalism, that is not parochial at any level. It has something to learn from other societies. And those societies are not distant societies as we see it in the modern Westphalian nation-state context that we live in the earlier session. We talked about these boundaries that are separating us. If we go beyond that Westphalian sovereignties and borders, the world looks very, very, very different. I always tell my students in Delhi that Oman is much nearer to us from Kerala than New Delhi. And it has been much nearer to us. These are not distant lands. Sri Lanka seems to be very distant. It's 20 minutes out there. And we used to conduct international seminars here. That was much easier earlier than conducting a national seminar. Because you could call people from Singapore, from Jayadeva Yamgada used to come from Sri Lanka and so on and so forth. So the kind of connections that I'm talking about are multi-layered connections, which also has a sensibility to cut across these national imaginations which we have in the international relations and area studies that we talk about. I've always been interested not in the international, but in the inter. That inter gives us a whole range of ideas and spaces to work with, which is an amorphous thing. The other one, again, with respect to Egypt, was my own personal experience. I was going to a meeting in a public library near Ilias' hometown, between Madiladam and Tripuraya. They were invited, I don't remember the topic that I was speaking there. I was a little bit late, bus arrived there late, and so I was crossing the road and going, the library hall was upstairs there. When I was running towards that hall, from the side of the road, somebody called me Mashe in Malayalam. Teacher or somebody. I looked at them. Two young women who was fully covered, their body was fully covered. Two Muslim young women told me that we were waiting for you to come because we saw in the regional newspaper in the today's program that you are coming. I said, what's the matter? They said, we read your article on Egyptian feminism in Pachakudra. Pachakudra, you should remember, the initial in a book form. Sachidanand was editing it at that point of time. I said, how did you get that? It's not even available in newsstands. And they said, we have photocopied and we are circulating it. So there's parallel circulation of this going on. And they said, we have come just to say thanks for that. We won't be staying for the program. And they went off. How is the Egyptian feminist thing appeal to them in such an emotional manner to come there and do that? This is like, a kind of that human connection that you make to reading something. Such experiences happen, in one of my visits to a Christian seminary in an Egyptian desert. I went there and saw the father, his Coptic seminary, and I said, I'm in a Hindu, I'm from India. And, he took me inside and then showed me he didn't speak for almost 5 minutes. He was just showing me and smiling and leading me inside the oasis where this seminary was situated. And below a huge tree, he stopped and told me to look up. Tamil Minal Hind, he said. And he was almost rhyming with what I said to him 5 minutes back. The Arabs, as you know, are fond of their poetry and those lines, etc. And he was saying that this is a tamarind tree, no Tamil Minal Hind. And you see the kind of connections you make there. He's saying that, your India is in the heart of us. You see the tree. He was poetic, playing with language, and things like that. So those kinds of connections are extremely significant. And when we think about gender, Maudhavi's own case I've mentioned, there are these cosmopolitan connections that we make. There is a kind of universalism of religion that also, we call it theological and things like that. That's a reductive term in that kind of a universe. But, when I discuss no matter how do we come to terms with the idea of, I was asking this to Amina Wadud, who is a good friend, her famous book, Quran and Quran. She's a good friend. She stays with me in JNU. She comes to really. She is somebody who is not only interested in women per se, Muslim women in particular, but also interested in different subjugated genders altogether, especially lesbian women and others. As a black woman from the United States and as a Muslim scholar, she has that kind of what you call the intersectionality as such to reflect upon. But her take on that whole question, how do you, as a religious woman, and as somebody who is thinking about the Quran, come to terms with the idea of feminism. She is attached with Islamic feminism as a terminology that we use. Her answer is that if you're a believer, if you believe in Allah, if you believe in God, and if every human being is a creation of God, how can you distinguish, can you discriminate one from the other? It's a kind of universal fact that she is talking about. So discrimination among human beings, that integrity of creation in her sense is a non-discriminatory idea. And discrimination on the basis of gender and sexuality and other things, therefore, is un-Islamic too, in her mind. It was almost the same thing when the current Pope, when he became Pope, the media persons were asking the question, I saw it in the television, what's your attitude towards the LGBTQ community and so on? For the Catholic leader, that's the main question that media wants to know. He said, they are all God's creation. That is it. Something similar that Amina was telling me. So at one level, Islam and this question of gender is addressed at that broad general sense of belonging in a wider world of creation for a believer. The other level is, as we in academics always say that distinction that you make between lived Islam and textual Islam, as you know. And lots of problems with that. As Mahmoud Kuria was mentioning earlier, how lived Islam is so closely related to those texts that he was working on, and see the circulation of texts, etc. But the way everyday Islam is practiced, how sacred spaces around religious, around mosques or around religious places, around the graves of Sufis and others, how they are constructed, and people on an everyday scale interact with them is another important thing. Most of you might have read Arundhati Roy's novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. Anjum, who never sleeps with the same two men in the cemetery every day. She changes her bed between the graves almost all the time. Arundhati talks about Jahanara Begum in the novel, and when she saw that the child that she gave birth to at that moment, as described in the novel, as you know, they were expecting, after all these girl children, they were expecting a boy. And they also found a word of start for him. And when she found that, to her horror in the novel, that this is neither a boy nor a girl, and she says that my Urdu, my language has all words for, everything, a carpet, everything has a gender. But my child, I don't have a language to describe that situation. What she does is, after recovering from, the pains of giving birth, she took the child to Hazrat Sarman's grave. It's in front of, by the side of Jama Masjid in Delhi, Shahjahanabad. Hazrat Sarman Shahid, as he is called, was beheaded by Aurangzeb. And people say that he is buried at the site of his beheading. It's just after the execution of Dara Shukov. Sarman and Dara Shukov were great friends. Hazrat Sarman lived most of his life as a naked man, sitting there, as a Sufi says. He came from Kashan, from Iran. He was infatuated with a Hindu boy he saw in Sindh, actually. And he saw Abhay Chand, his name, Abhay, was reciting ghazals. So he was fascinated with the poet and came to Delhi and wanted to live with Abhay Chand. He went to this Hindu family. Actually, Sarman is a Jewish man. Okay? He converted to Islam in the process. Jew from Kashan in Iran. And Sarman Shahid, he became Shahid not because of his views on sexuality and gender and choices of that kind, but because of his religious views. As a Muslim, he was, for many people, he was a mix of various things. His Judaic tradition, his Hindu affinities, and his Muslim as his identity, and so on. And in this whole case, what happens, and I don't have much time, is that after he was beheaded, and that's a great story, Aurangzeb asked him to say the kalima. So somewhere when he started La ilaha, he cannot finish it. So he was saying there is no God. And he says, I can't go further. So he was beheaded in that context, the stories say. And what you see is that he becoming a saint. On an everyday scale, Muslims and Hindus go there. Like Jana Begum in the novel Going to His Grave. That book by Muhammad Knight, his book on Sufi deluge, talking about the same story, turned it from the new book actually. And you see the Jama Masjid, its vicinities, the Islamic religious space heralding a Jewish Islamic Sufi as somebody who is giving solace to, and what Jana Begum in the novel was asking him is, look after him and teach me how to love him. He's already named as Aftab, so in the novel it's mentioned as him. Teach me how to love him. And Salman Shahid teaches everyone how to love all cultures around. So this kind of connections and ideas that you see in Islam's own interaction with questions of gender, most of the time, are thoroughly interrelated and so complex. But for everyday people, it's great solace. It's a sacred domain where everything is possible. And he's really, and if you go to that region of Delhi, you get messages about print and books, etc. A whole range of works about him with different kinds of interpretations and stories and all kinds of things. This, to me, I don't have. So that kind of so-called everyday Islam or lived Islam, that kind of aspect, this is one element that I want. The other element, I'll try to stop with that, is textual Islam, the interpretative tradition, hermeneutical tradition within Islam. And the key word there obviously is jihad, as I already mentioned. This is where Islamic legal practices has an overdose of rationality within it. You see, apart from the Quran, and parts of Hadith, or even the selection process of Hadith is a very rational, methodological kind of thing. But ijtihad is basically reading a text by application of human reason, and then ijma and consensus question or qiyas, it's also analogical reason. So most part of it, Sharia, Islamic law is basically an overdose of rationality, I should say, within it. That's not how Islamic law is understood, basically. So if you see Fatima Manisi's own interpretations of the Hadith, or Ananawad's interpretation of the Quran, or Asma Barla's interpretation of the Quran, for that matter, or Aziza Hebri's interpretation of Islamic law, and Hebri and for others, and especially for the Iranian Islamic feminist Abdul Karim Sarosh's philosophy of he said his philosophical role was, as against that by Shariati and others, who wrote that famous book, Fatima is Fatima. The whole point for Abdul Karim's solution, the Islamic feminists in Iran, was to make Islam lean, do some exercises. It's becoming obese. On every single matter, religion is invoked. And so, as a philosopher, Sarosh was asking his students and friends to undertake this process of making Islam lean. Invoke Islam only when you are in deep moral crisis or when you need some kind of guidance as a believer. And Islamic feminism, that kind of tradition of ijtihad in Shia Islam, because that idea of ijtihad is enshrined in the Iranian constitution and so on, as you know. The better part of it and the worst part of it. The half of it is the idea of wilayat faqih and the other half is French constitution. Both states are interested in women's bodies, you know, how they dress, and both the French state and the Iranian state. They want to look at that. So the whole lot that I want to speak on, but I won't do that. The textual tradition as well gives us enough scope for contextually define that ethical realm that Professor Gopal was talking about, how to confront the everyday reality and keeping the dignity of the human, the dignity of all creation for that matter. That element is drawn through the textual interpretation, and therefore, if one could read the everyday practices and the textual traditions together, one can get innumerable, occasions and possibilities for looking at gender and its interconnections with religion. A whole lot of resources can be drawn from that. I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.